Hi, and welcome to a season overview for season 6 from Westeros.org. It's taken a bit of time after the end of the season. I had to clear my head a bit before I went back and thought about the season as a whole. The things I do for, duty, I suppose you could say. I did want to have a nice finish to the whole season, look at some of the arcs as a whole, try and see where they were going with certain characters. So I've tried to break this down by area, and then looking at characters or groups of characters where it sort of fits most organically, and we'll see what comes out of it. We'll start in the north, and we'll start with the Stark siblings, or Stark cousins rather, Jon and Sansa. Jon starts off the season dead and gets better, as we had expected. After his resurrection, he is feeling a bit lost and doesn't really want to stay in the watch. He feels betrayed. He doesn't really want to fight anymore. He gives up the watch, seems to just sort of hand it over to Dolorous Ed, like, here, now you're Lord Commander. Not really following protocol or anything, but that's how it is. And then Sansa shows up, and at first he's very reluctant to do any further fighting. He doesn't really want to, go back and try and take back Winterfell. He's done with fighting. So she tries to work on him, but it's not until Ramsay's letter shows up where he finally thought, well, okay, I guess we have to go and take back Winterfell. And then he starts this whole deal of trying to gather men and get ready to try and take back Winterfell. And, it goes so, really. I mean, Jon doesn't really accomplish that much. A lot of the gathering of people and persuading of people is done by Davos instead. And then once you get to the fight, Jon works out a tactic which he promptly forgets all about and screws up entirely. And yet, somehow, once they're done with everything, he gets elected king in the north. I'm not sure that was very well earned. I'm not sure it was a particularly strong arc for him. His is okay, I guess, but there are a lot of questions about how he's handling things. The whole, just abandoning the watch, because some of them stabbed him, the others, didn't. But no, he abandons the watch, and then he lets himself be elected king in the north over Sansa, who is sitting there as well, and he doesn't say anything about that. So I'm not sure it's a very strong characterization, and particularly interesting characterization that we get for Jon this season. And Sansa, well, it's sort of the other half of the coin, and they go together to show what the problem is here. Because the thing with Sansa is, she starts out, we keep hearing that, this is going to be a season where Sansa is, strong and powerful beforehand. Okay, we heard that before last season too, and that didn't turn out so well. But now it seems, well, they're fleeing, at least she made that decision. But then, they get to that river early on, and she's too frightened to even go into the water, even though, before that she said that, death is better than going back to Ramsay, but apparently not better than freezing a bit. So Theon has to be strong and get her to go along. And then she does show a bit of strength with the whole scene with Brienne. She takes sort of charge of that. She swears Brienne into her service, echoing the scene with Brienne and her mother. But then, well, problems start kind of piling up. We see her with Jon, and now they try to build up Sansa by having Jon be the one who's reluctant, and Sansa is like, we have to go and take back our home. And they don't seem to be able to build up two characters at once. It's always, we have to have one, tear down one, or we have to have them be in the background. We can't have them work together. And this gets worse as the season progresses, because then they use Littlefinger. They have her kind of dressing him down and, confronting him, and, you sold me to Ramsay and all this. And that's not a bad scene, but then they use Littlefinger to sow discord between Sansa and Jon, and Sansa buys it. She starts hiding things from Jon, and that's kind of the theme for the rest of the season for her. Sansa doesn't speak up. Never mind that she then goes and complains about not having, been invited to speak at when they were making the plans, for example, or she gets angry when she wasn't included enough in gathering the men, or she wants to go and gather more men, and John's like, no, we have to act now, and we don't know that we're gonna get any more men. And she knows that she sent a letter to Littlefinger, and she doesn't tell him. Sansa is quiet, and this continues, all the way up until the end. They have her refusing Littlefinger's overture. They're like, hey, be queen in the north, and then we'll take the Iron Throne together. She rebuffs that, and then when they have the whole election thing, or impromptu election of a new northern leader, she just sits there, and we find out afterwards that this is supposed to be Sansa being upset about being cheated out of her birthright, so that she's not happy with the situation. But she makes no indication of this. Most people read this as, oh, well, Sansa is pleased for Jon's sake. She thinks it's right that he should be the leader. They've made up afterwards, and she said, oh, it was wrong that I kept things from you, and now she's happy to have him as king in the north. But that's apparently not the case. So they want to continue with this whole Littlefinger and Sansa arc in some way in next season, presumably setting her on a course against Jon. And where Jon's parentage is going to play into this, well, it's probably going to have a part in it. So the only thing they really set up, and this is, again, we hear, now that's part of the reason that I waited to do this review. I wanted to get some of the reactions, some of the commentary from actors after the season. And apparently at Comic-Con, Sophie Turner comments on how the big thing for Sansa this season was the fact that she got to kill Ramsay. And this whole killing of Ramsay, this happens before the election, of course, it's very un-Stark-like, and it's very un-Sansa-like, really. The fact that she decides to go and kill Ramsay, and Jon allows it in a rather unclean way by letting his dogs kill him and eat him. That's not exactly, passing the sentence and swinging the sword. Yeah, she let out the dog, but I don't think it counts. Having basically the whole season be about Sansa's moment of power being, yay, she took revenge. It just shows how incredibly, what a hard-on the producers have for revenge. And it's always a cool thing when it happens. I don't know. It was disappointing to see the Sansa and Jon interaction play out in this way and with these results. I think it showed a lot of the problems of shoving two characters together that really shouldn't be together at this point in the story that they started out with, and them wanting to, move things along as quickly as possible, and of course having unnecessary conflict in there by having Littlefinger play them off against each other. I don't think it was particularly well structured in any way. After Jon and Sansa, I guess you could say that Davos is really the character that gets the most room in the Northern storyline. I'm skipping Ramsay here. I felt that there wasn't that much to touch on in, the whole, yeah, he murdered his father, but he just continues to be their favorite evil villain, basically. But anyway, Davos is, well, he's very much shoved into the storyline. He really doesn't have a place in the storyline now. He is very much a third wheel, and they try to solve this by giving him as much as possible to do. He is instrumental in having Jon resurrected. He's instrumental in gathering men. He is instrumental in taking decisions during battle. It's an awful lot. I mean, Liam Cunningham is a great actor, but it just doesn't quite feel like he fits in there. You kind of have to go with Sansa there, wondering about, why are you relying so much on Davos anyway? And then, of course, the big problem is that the big finish with him is him confronting Jon about Melisandre and saying, you have to execute her and get rid of her. She murdered Shireen. And this is after he basically has one early mention of Shireen. That's when Brienne shows up and he wonders if she knows anything about what happened. And that's it. Other than that, he's kind of, unusually much with Melisandre, even though she showed up from the battlefield after Stannis' defeat, has presumably refused to tell him precisely what happened, or has lied to him about Shireen. But it seems basically he hasn't pressed and she hasn't told him. And yet he's trusting her enough that, when she has a crisis of faith, he's pushing through and gets her to resurrect Jon. And then, no, once he finds the pyre at the end, then all of a sudden it's all about Shireen. And yes, I understand that, he did love Shireen and he would be upset. It's just that they don't play it consistently up to that point. His interactions with Melisandre this is just basically so that they needed to have Melisandre around to this point, I guess, because they had said that she had a vision of seeing herself walking the battlements on Winterfell, which is what they show her doing when Davos is giving her a murderous stare. She doesn't really do anything at the end. Once she's resurrected Jon, she doesn't really have that much of a point. And now apparently she's supposed to be somewhere else. So it felt like they were tying up these elements of the plot in a very weird way, and they were stretching out the whole when is Davos going to confront Melisandre. So I don't know, it didn't feel particularly good. And the same Melisandre, she's not really a main character, but she's around a lot, and her arc this season, they start her off with this continued crisis of faith once she realizes, Stannis has lost, and then that kind of gets fixed once she's able to resurrect Jon and have somebody else to follow, and that's kind of it. She doesn't really do that much. So from that sort of hyped beginning with revealing her age and that whole thing, that's really the most important thing that happens, that and Jon's resurrection, and then that's kind of it. And they just have her along until it's time to, now we need to pack her away somewhere else. I'm not sure what she's needed for next, but clearly she wasn't supposed to be around there anyway. And then if we look at the other northern lords as such, and the North remembers, they kind of reduced that whole idea to one throwaway line in the previous season, the old woman who tells Sansa that the North remembers. Because the North was really not that great about remembering that much in the season. Their loyalty, I don't give much for it. Took an awful lot to rally a few of them until basically, the Mormonts and Lyanna Mormont she remembered, and that's about it. The others were very reluctant. They make a lot before the battle of how Ramsay is ruling with fear, and his men are, frightened to turn against him. And yet, even though they have opportunities to do so, it seems most of them fight until the bitter end. The ones that weren't there, they basically stayed out of the fighting entirely, but none of the ones that are there seem inclined to turn, even when he's sacrificing quite a few of them by shooting arrows at both the Stark forces and his own men. So yeah, they still, even that didn't seem to make the North remember. And at the end, they don't remember Sansa at all. They just call for Jon as king in the North. So this whole idea about a trueborn Stark, or that either being resurrected from death or deserting the Night's Watch, seems to be things that they take really lightly. So they didn't exactly impress. And the whole storyline, like I said, with the Jon and Sansa, it really suffers from having these characters that weren't supposed to be together based on their earlier trajectories. They've been put together, and they force things to happen or not to happen as they need it. Okay, we want A and B to happen. These characters will just hang around until this happens. They will speak or not speak as the plot requires, rather than what would be organic for the characters. And I think that is a theme that I'm going to get back to several times during this overview, that it's not very organic the way the plot unfolds in the season. Beyond the Wall, well, that's where the mysteries were revealed this season. Those were the big spoilers and the big revelations, of things that are to come in the books quite clearly. So it was the most, distressing for those who didn't want to be spoiled for the books in many senses. Character-wise, there isn't much of a of an arc to it. The characters that are there are primarily, they become plot devices. Bran is able to see things. He goes back, into the past, and he sees that the children made the others. This will obviously be a plot point of some note in the future. He gets in touch with the Night King, and that sort of allows him to pass the barriers and attack them under the weirwood somehow. And of course, he sees the past of Ned, and most importantly, of the Tower of Joy. And I guess he's supposed to, we're supposed to take from it that he realizes himself that Jon, is the son of Lyanna. I'm not sure if Bran right away is supposed to put two and two together and also hear everything about what she's saying, and also understand that he's Rhaegar's son. But I'm guessing this is something that, he's going to have a revelation to make in the future. That's why he's now been brought to the wall as well by Benjen, Cold Hands, although they never really call him that. But so he's mainly a plot device. Still, they do manage to put in a very, very strong emotional scene with the revelation of what Hodor's name means and Hodor's demise. That was probably the high point of the season, even though I think that the circumstances are a bit contrived. I still don't buy a door under the weirwood tree. I think we'll see it someplace entirely different in the novels. But we do know that this is, more or less the truth of it. And of course, it spawned a ton of theories about time-traveling Bran and all that. I still don't know quite what to make of it. I don't think that's precisely what we're dealing with. But Bran's abilities will clearly be central to what's coming next. It's clear that from, the setup that, he's now supposed to be ready for the Night King showing up, in the realm of men. He's the, one who's now the three-eyed crow. So this season obviously set him up in a big way. And overall, I think the pacing of it and such worked pretty well. It's a relatively uncomplicated sequence, given that there's not that many things to tie together. So, but I think they did it pretty well. And the Hodor moment, despite some oddities about it, it is probably the strongest emotional moment of this season and for a few seasons, to be honest. Moving southwards, we end up in the Riverlands. The big part of the storyline is, of course, the return of the Hound. I think that given this, they could have given it a little bit more time. As it is, he basically, in one episode, we get the introduction of the disillusioned Hound who doesn't feel that he has a purpose, who is not quite sure about killing people. He's sort of a new person. The old self has sort of died. That is all dealt with in one episode when he has his illusions shattered and his new friends are killed, and he takes up killing people again. And in the next episode, he meets up with the Brotherhood, and they're also telling him that, there's a purpose for him, just like the Septon said, although they seem to have a purpose that is much more warlike for him. And the scenes with McShane's Septon character or McCann, the Hound, they're well acted. The speeches, compared to what the speeches from the books are not impressive. When he gets to the Brotherhood, it's nice to see them again. Both Beric and Thoros are well acted, interesting characters. But on the whole, it doesn't feel like there's a lot to it. It's very late in the season. There's only 2 episodes in total, not that much time. And, you kind of think about what this could have been. The Riverlands storyline, the whole looking at the plight of the small folk and all that we get in A Feast for Crows. There's really very little done with it. So it becomes quite lackluster when you compare to what actually is in the book. And the same really goes for the Riverrun part of the Riverlands storyline. It really seems to be there mainly to have A, Brienne out of the North for a while, and B, Jaime out of King's Landing for a while. Oh, and them meeting up, of course. The actions of Edmure and the Blackfish are uh, fairly inconsequential and entirely driven by what needs to happen to Brienne and what needs to happen to Jaime. So the Blackfish refuses help for Sansa and sends Brienne back on her way. She gets to chat with Jaime and then wave at him. Basically, that's it. Presumably, this is supposed to be a reminder for Jaime that is supposed to get him back on track of some kind of storyline which he's no longer on track for, but I'll get back to that when I discuss Jaime. Edmure also acts in a very incongruous way, really. I mean, he's prepared to give up the Blackfish quite easily to Jaime. The fact that he's persuaded to give up the castle is one thing, but the fact that he'll just hand over a relative like that it makes him into an entirely different character, really. And with so little to go on, I don't see, but no, that's just, they want things done a certain way. Don't care about what the characters think about it, really. So it's again, it feels like rather like filler material, and it's just a way to have the Brienne and Jaime meeting happen. We have a very brief section in the Reach as well, and that's all Sam and Gilly. Sam and Gilly finally reaches Sam's home, where he gets a very brief stay because his father rather quickly finds out that Gilly is a wildling, which he has huge issues with for some reason. Decides to, well, she can stay, but I'm banishing you for good. Sam seems ready to ditch Gilly finally, but no. Instead, he gets up in the middle of the night, decides to make off with Gilly and the kid and steal Heartsbane and drag all of that along to the Citadel. So at least he does go to the Citadel. He and Gilly are basically the only ones throughout the season, and probably the previous season as well, to travel at a somewhat realistic pace, because it does seem to take them most of the early, traveling to the Reach and then traveling from his home to the Citadel is not, he's not just teleporting there. And it mostly felt as if they basically, we have to show Sam a few times this season for contractual reasons. We would have preferred it if we could just have said that, shown him in the last episode and now he's at the Citadel. It didn't feel like there was much point to any of the previous scenes or, showing his family or anything. It didn't really add anything to the character. We knew that he was terrified of his father. We knew already that he is far too attached to Gilly to, be properly sticking with his duties. But, there he is in the Citadel. I don't know how long he's going to be staying there, what more they're doing with it, but as I said, it really felt like they just had to show him a certain amount of time. Another big hub is, of course, King's Landing. And let's start to see what the Tyrells were up to this season. Marjorie tried to do a bit more plotting. She's locked up. She's trying to get herself out of there and manages to sort of persuade the High Septon that she's been converted, and then that she converts Tommen, which may or may not be a pretense. That's not exactly clear. But it doesn't really amount to that much more. Or she manages to get a message to her grandmother that she's still a Tyrell, but then she's blown up. She's lost. It's not a very satisfying conclusion to the the Tyrell Lannister and the Marjorie Cersei confrontation over the last season. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily have to be. People don't have to succeed in their goals, and there can be things that just fizzle out and die. I just think they've made so much of it. I'm not sure. It felt really like she was mostly there as, one of the targets of the High Sparrow's many speeches. That seemed to be the main point of Marjorie this season. But hey, at least she got to do quite a bit more than poor Loras, who just gets to hang out in a cell for a bit before, he gets carved up some and then blown up. They really, really just wanted to get rid of that character, I think, because the fact that they decided to have sort of the whole problem of him being in prison and really him being the central part in the trial, other than Cersei, always felt very strange and very forced, and yeah, it didn't really go anywhere, and then it just went kaboom. Mace, of course, also went kaboom, but he never really amounted to much of anything other than a little supposed fun on the side, which of course leaves us with just Olenna, and we have her doing a bit of plotty thing during the season. She sits on the small council a couple of times, gets to throw out some quips here and there, and then she shows up in Dorne at the end, and everyone's very sad, or at least I was very sad that she was still alive. The fact that they've taken this, she's not a second, she's a tertiary character at best in the novels. She's not exactly fleshed out in the novel. She's supposed to be a bit of a funny side character. Taking that character and really not adding anything to it, but giving her such a big role, that just doesn't work. And now she's all that we're left with as far as the Tyrells are concerned. And given the company that she's now hanging out with, that makes me even more worried for that part of the storyline. But as it was, I thought it was a relatively lackluster wrap-up as far as the Tyrells went. Moving on to the Lannisters, let's start with King Tommen. And he has a bit of a weird season, to be honest. He starts out feeling all, loathing himself for the fact that he didn't, defend his mother and his wife against the faith. So he has a bit of a crisis, he has a bit of a heart-to-heart with Cersei, and then asks her basically, help me be strong, I should have killed them all, and please help me be strong. And that doesn't really go anywhere, because the next thing, what happens is that he, Marjorie ends up either fake converting him or actually converting him to the faith. The way he acts, he's certainly a very convincing fake convertee, if that's the case. I think he may actually have bought it, and I suppose found, nice with some strong guidance or something like that. But of course that doesn't work out very well. He banishes Jaime, he, curtails what Cersei can do, and decides that she can't have a trial by combat. It has to be in the Sept instead, judged by Septons. And then, of course, everything blows up, and it's no wonder really that he decides to take a dive out of the window after that season, because he's I guess he's been, kind of pulled between different people, pulled between Marjorie and the Faith and Cersei, and he's just completely lost. If they wanted to portray him as extremely weak-willed, I suppose it is a consistent portrayal, except for that bit of him suddenly, having a tiny flash of Joffrey 2.0 and asking Cersei how to teach him how to rule, when, just a bit earlier than that, he has told Jaime that he's, quite certain that Cersei had Prince Trystane killed, and is telling Jaime not to have any illusions about her. So he knows what she is, and he still has that moment. So I'm not sure. There are inconsistencies here as well, but I suppose if we take him as an extremely weak-willed young king, it's at least acceptable. The other Lannisters, well, that's less acceptable. Cersei is continuing on this, trajectory that we've had of her, becoming more and more power-hungry. Her love for her children really seems to recede more and more, the more of them die. I mean, she grieves for Myrcella, but it seems relatively brief, and I'm not sure when it comes to the point that she grieves much for Tommen at all. It seems really better to have him out of the way so she can claim the throne for herself. They play a little bit with her having a lingering fear of the High Septon during one moment, but it seems to be more of a sort of a setup for her deciding, no, I'm choosing violence and I'm going to be using the mountain and I'm going to have him rip somebody's head off. So it seems to be one of those, is she going to break? No, of course she isn't moments. And then, once, she's still, head over heels for Jaime for much of the season, except once she's got the throne, it seems that she's kind of dismissing him as well. So yes, they're going with the full on crazy now, I guess, but it's less convincing when it comes from where it comes from on the show. I think they've spent too much time trying to, you know, soften her edges and all of that, and then it just turns into this sort of hard ass Cersei who's going to, you know, yes, I'm going to ignore everyone's advice and I'm going to take the throne and never mind any concerns, when she hasn't really been that crazy and unhinged before. But the big problem, of course, is Jaime, because throughout most of the season, Jaime is like 150% on Cersei's side, in, you know, extremely stark contrast to where he is in the novels. And yes, they've diverged on so many points, but the problem is Jaime's arc. I mean, he doesn't really have an arc. He's not really an independent character any longer. He just reiterates. He and Cersei reiterate how, you know, it's just the two of us, and we're gonna kill everyone else, and we're all that matter. They even have it when he's at Riverrun and you know, trying to persuade Edmure to give up Riverrun. He's using that as the argument, saying that only thing that matters is Cersei, and I love her, and I want to get back to her, and I'll do anything to get back to her. In contrasting those 2 points, where he is at Riverrun in the novels and on the show, it's just extremely sad seeing that, what they've done with this character. And as I said in the Riverlands section, I think maybe they are using the idea that now he's seen Brienne again, and she's tried to talk some to him about honor, that he's supposed to, once he gets back to King's Landing, and he is looking dubious when he sees Cersei on the throne and realizes what she has done. So yes, maybe now they're gonna have this break, but it's too little, too late. It shouldn't have come at such a major, you know, yes, she's blown up the whole city. That's a nice, huge chunk of crazy there. The fact that he can't realize it prior to that point makes him, you know, rather dull and stupid and not a very nice person at all. Not a very redeemable person, and he's supposed to have some redeemable qualities in the novels. So overall, I think King's Landing is showing not the problem that the North has with characters being shoved together that shouldn't be together. It is rather the fact that, you know, they really clean the slate quite heavily with Cersei blowing up the Sept, and I think that is showing a bit of them being rushed and wanting to wrap this up as soon as possible, rather than having anything play out more organically. We'll have a big spectacle and we'll kill off, you know, the most main character since the Red Wedding, and that's what they were talking about beforehand, and, you know, hinting at a big episode with lots of death, and it's all about the spectacle. It's all about the deaths. It's not about letting any of these storylines develop in a good way or having characters have consistent arcs, and that just doesn't make it very interesting to watch. As for Dorne, I am really just going to leave it again at, what the fuck was that? Some kind of feminist power grab against, you know, the weak men, and let's get rid of all the characters that we think that the audience didn't like, except they didn't realize that there was the Sand Snakes, that, you know, their version of the Sand Snakes that people really didn't like, and the, you know, weirdly vengeful one-note Laria. But never mind, let's kill off Doran and Trystane, and then let's set up this little, you know, cabal with Varys and Olenna at the end, and let's steal some of the best material from A Feast for Crows and turn it into, you know, a travesty of itself. It was just absolutely horrible. I've said it before, I really don't want to see a single moment more with these characters. Unfortunately, that is probably not going to happen, because they, you know, announced they're filming a lot in Spain next year. So we're probably going to see a lot more of these characters. Hopefully they will all die horribly very soon. That's about all I can hope for now. But yeah, it was really terrible. They did a horrible job with Dorne in season 5, and the fact that they could actually do a worse job with it in season 6 is in some way pretty impressive, if in a very, very sad way. In Bravos, Arya has a very stretched out arc. Again, they want to see her in as many episodes or include her in as many episodes as possible, and it doesn't really do that much. There's quite a few training montages, sadly with no 80s music. And once, Arya manages to pass some of these tests and gets sent out to do her first mission, she fails abysmally because apparently the, crazy murderous killer that we saw taking care of Meryn Trant in last season is apparently not damaged enough by everything she's been through so far to kill an innocent person. Never mind that she has sworn herself, or joined this organization and started training with them. But no, Arya is too nice to do that. She's only going to kill people who deserve it. Which leads to her, getting stabbed multiple times, still surviving, and then having a ridiculous chase sequence through Bravos, and of course facing up with her new nemesis, because they had to, of course, build up an actual nemesis for her in the waif. Everything has to be, everyone has to have a recognizable nemesis that they can deal with. And of course she kills her, and then she walks away from the Faceless Men, and Jaqen, or whoever it is these days, whoever is wearing Jaqen's face, or he just lets her go with a mysterious smile. Back to the Riverlands with her, where she shows up with a new face, which I'm not sure how she's supposed to obtain, since doesn't really like killing innocent people or whatever, and we didn't see her sneaking one into her pocket when she left the House of Black and White. But anyway, she's got a new face on. And she kills Walder Frey, and again we have this horrible misuse of an episode from the novels that is, used at the wrong point, in the wrong way, and incredibly much more weakly than it is. So we get her Frey pie moment, and it really just sucks, and there, Walder Frey gone, Arya has had some vengeance, and woohoo, more vengeance! And of course Arya still completely unscathed by these things, because she still won't kill innocent people, except possibly for that girl who wore the face that she needed or whatever. And it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Logistic ones, like how did she survive those stab wounds, and how did she get that face, and also just the weirdness of the Faceless Men letting her walk off after training with them, after learning their secrets. They could easily take her out, except no, she's so badass, so she took out the wave, so they probably don't dare send anyone else after her or something. And Jaqen has that little smile, which apparently, again, it's always nice to see what the actors say afterwards. The actor really didn't have any idea what it was supposed to mean and what he was thinking when he sent off Arya, or allowed Arya to go. And that's really bothersome, that we see this coming from several actors, that they don't really have a good idea of why their characters do certain things. That seems like acting 101 and script writing 101. Know your character's motivations. But that doesn't really seem to matter to the producers for this season, and I'm not sure it has mattered for quite a few seasons, to be honest. I've saved Meereen and the Dothraki Sea for last, and let's start in Meereen proper, where in Dany's absence we have the Tyrion comedy show, mainly, really. Of course, there's Varys there, and there's Missandei and Grey Worm, but they're really very secondary to Tyrion for the most part. It all sort of revolves around him, and yet there's very little to his character any longer. We don't get a good sense of where he's at emotionally, what he wants. I mean, he wants to get back to Westeros, and he's thrown in with Dany, but there's no sense of a desire for revenge really driving him. There's no sense that he's particularly upset. Yes, he's drinking, but he's been doing that all along. He's drinking and making funny quips, or supposedly funny quips. That's no different from what he's been doing for quite a few seasons. And basically, Missandei and Grey Worm are entirely just bystanders, and butts of his jokes or attempted inclusions in his jokes. Varys has a bit more to do. The whole deal with inviting the Red Priests, and we have a little bit about Varys' background, and he's mistrusting them, but it's fairly light. And then he's off to Dorne, and we all know what I think about that. But Tyrion, I really feel like it's been a long time since Dinklage actually did any acting on the show of any note. He's just kind of phoning it in, and they're not giving him much to work with, and I'm not sure that the character that they've shaped together is a character that is salvageable at this point. It's an empty shell. Dario and Jorah, well, we get a bit of a buddy sequence with them. It's okay, their interactions and such, and there's not that much to it. Jorah's illness leads to a sappy moment eventually with him and Dany, where she orders him off to go and cure himself because she'll need him by her side. It's terribly ill-advised, and I don't know why they included it. It doesn't fit the show at all, and it doesn't fit the characters. Dario doesn't really do that much except gloat over being the one that Dany picked, and then at the end, oops, dumped for a throne, left behind in Marine, and that's kind of it. We don't really see any stronger reaction from him. He pouts a little bit and gets a little annoyed, but that's about it. And you don't get much. There's not really much chemistry between him and Dany, to be honest. So you don't really care that much about the fact that she dumped him. Dany herself, well, one of my favorite characters in the novels, so I have a lot to say about her. Before this season, Emilia Clarke, who has read all the published books, said that, she talked about Dany in a way that corresponded to where she's left at the end of A Dance with Dragons, where she sort of realized that, or thinks, she's has come to the realization that, she's not made for peace. She's not made for ruling in peacetime. She's a conqueror. Like her dragons, she's fire and blood. If they are monsters, and so is she. And it's a fairly dark place for her to be in, but that's the point that she's come to, and I think that's what we're going to see playing out in the novels when she confronts the Dothraki. Here, well, the Dothraki, take her away, and Drogon is nowhere to be seen, and even though Emilia Clarke talks about Dany in this way, is that reflected in how she's acted and how she's written? No, not really. First, she's like having hissy fits with the Dothraki and trying to impress on them her various, foreign titles. Having spent time with them, she should know that it's pointless. And she seems to have forgotten all about, once she mentions that she's Drogo's widow, that she's supposed to be with the Dosh Khaleen. That seems to come as a surprise to her. And she's acting really weird as if she's not understanding much at all about Dothraki culture. And then, of course, in the 4th episode, we get this big confrontation with her and the Khals. And now, the Dothraki do understand strength, so the fact that she makes a forceful speech is one thing. The fact that it doesn't go over well because she's a woman is also fine. But then they had this idea that, she needs to do something on her own without her dragons. So we're going to have her set fire to the whole tent and then walk out unscathed in a cheap ripoff of the finale of season 1. And then all the Dothraki are going to go, whoa, we like this arsonist and she's awesome. I guess they would, react to the fact that she walked out of the flames unharmed. Most likely they'd probably think she's some kind of witch, and I'm not sure it would necessarily lead them to following her, given the fact that the dragon's nowhere to be seen. And then they add this moment in the 6th episode, where she does fetch Drogon and give a speech to the Dothraki, by going over and conquering, basically taking Drogo's speech and will you follow me to conquer Westeros and all of this, and this shouldn't have been 2 different moments. It was really strange structurally to make it 2 different moments. But anyway, we seem to have gotten Dany back on the path of conquest, right? And then she comes back to Meereen after Tyrion has made a little boo-boo there, and the masters have come back for their slaves and started bombing Meereen. And she is rightfully pissed off at what they've been doing in her absence, or well, she did kind of up and leave them, so maybe not so rightfully after all, actually. But she tells him what she plans to do, which is to, annihilate the other cities and the masters. And he's like, oh no, you can't do that. That's evil stuff. That's like, your father wanting to burn all of King's Landing. So, Dany the Conqueror, Dany who's realized that she's, fire and blood, a monster just like her dragons, is talked out of this by Tyrion, who, of course, conveniently forgets that she's bringing a Dothraki horde with her to Westeros. Never mind, I'm sure they're going to behave just fine when they get there. And we see this echoed again when she has this conversation with when Yara and Theon have shown up and they're offering their ships and planning to team up and go over to Westeros. Then they have this silly little speech from Dany about how they all had horrible fathers who left the world the worse place than when they came into it, and they're not going to do the same. They're going to make the world a better place. And also, the Ironborn can't reave anymore. But she's bringing a Dothraki horde to Westeros. And in episode 6 of the season, she told them that they were going to go over and tear down castles and kill the men in the Iron Clothes. I guess she didn't mention the whole raping and pillaging just at that point, but what does she think that the Dothraki horde is going to do in Westeros? Just kind of politely knock on houses and tell people to, hey, get out of here, we're taking over. So it doesn't fit together. Either she is this ruthless conqueror who will do anything to regain Westeros, or she's still on this kick about breaking the wheel and bringing social progress to Westeros. You can't have it both ways, but they're really trying desperately. And the overall in Meereen and in Dothraki Sea is really just Dany, but in Meereen, those bits were really just, I felt, treading water this season because they didn't leave enough characters and enough plot once Dany left. They dealt with some of the Harpies last season, and they never made anything about it being an internal conflict. It was all from the outside, so it was all that just one conflict. There was not much more for them to discover. They killed off Barristan, so all they have to work with is Tyrion and Varys, really, with sidekicks Missandei and Grey Worm. And it wasn't really very interesting. It's sort of you're all just waiting to see, okay, what's going to happen when Dany comes back. So, yeah, very doubtful about the execution, but particularly doubtful about the consistency of how they portrayed Dany and how they structured her arc. I'll try to summarize my thoughts about the season as a whole. I do have to say that, as with the previous seasons, it's been clearer and clearer with every season, and the production values are incredible. There are some, amazing CGI, some amazing scenery being used. They've got amazing locations that they use. There's some, very good shooting, some quite good directing as well. The opening of the 10th episode, I've already talked about the Hodor scene, which was really well done, I think. The opening of the 10th episode, the scoring there, and the silence at the beginning, all of that is very nicely done, and there are other moments that are strong, if not as strong as those. But even when you add that together, and then you look at the writing, of course, is that's kind of the heart of it. The story is at the heart of it, no matter how nice you make it look. And this season does show a lot of signs of being, they have characters that they force together unorganically, and they're trying to move things along as quickly as possible. Travel times are completely out the window. It's just a matter of getting, if somebody needs to be at a certain place, they will be at that place when they are needed. They don't have to solve any of the logistic problems that the novels work so hard at solving, with getting people, at the right place, the right point in time, and doing so in an organic fashion. There is absolutely nothing organic about the plot this season, and characters don't act in an organic way. They make decisions because the plot, or rather the next big moment, demands it. And that's really the problem. The show has become more and more about just being the big moments, killing off characters, spectacles, shocks, awe. There is no substance underneath that. You just sit and wait, when's the next big action moment? And people complain when there's, not enough action, because there's really nothing else to think about. There's nothing else that you want to sit and consider. There's not much to consider when it comes to character motivations, because when you start examining them, it all falls apart. And as I've brought up a couple of times, it's very telling when actors can't afterwards explain why their characters acted in a certain way. We heard this already after the last season when Stephen Delane, who played Stannis, did some very frank interviews where he was talking about how he didn't understand his character and his motivations at all. And some people would dismiss that as, well, maybe he didn't, it was a genre show, he didn't really care to get into the character. I don't think that if that was the case that he would have actually brought those things up if he knew that it was a failing of his own to some extent because he wasn't interested in the material. It clearly seems to be a problem with them not explaining to people why their characters do certain things. And to be honest, I think it's because they don't know why the characters act in certain ways. I think we see it very clearly with Sansa and all of her mysterious silences throughout the season. This is not because they want her to be mysterious about what she's going to do. It's because they don't really know what she would say in that season, because in that sequence, because it just doesn't make sense for where she is. So the fact that they've lost the plot when it comes to organic character development and organic story development really doesn't bode well for them, the way that they're going to be wrapping things up. I feel that I think it's going to be very rushed. I think they're going to be clearing out people out of the way as quickly as possible. It's all going to be, vengeance is probably going to continue to be the big theme and a big woohoo for them, rather than something potentially problematic for a character. So I really don't have, I had very few hopes after season 5, obviously, given that we weren't certain that we were going to continue watching. As it was, well, you didn't continue. I did, because I was going to do the translation anyway. Most likely, I will be translating next season again if they still have the job with the company that I work for. And then, yes, I will watch and I will review, but and I will try and, as much as I can, to look at each episode somewhat on its own merits, because I think with this season I don't really even have to do that much comparing to the books. It's just with some particular elements like Jaime and so on, where you kind of constantly feel like you want to look at this is character development, and then compare it to what he's doing on the show, which is not character development at all. But for the most part, because this is ahead of the books now, it's really a matter of saying, well, these characters they're just not moving forward in a way that makes sense. They're not making decisions that make sense. It's all just dictated by what they want to happen. And it's all, I think, again, we can sum up this whole season as, creatively it made sense to us because we wanted it to happen.